of the House of January 5, 2011, of the following member on part of the House of the Commission on International Religious Freedom for a term ending May 14, 2014.
Mr. Samuel Gagenson of Branford, Connecticut.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. West, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we end our congressional session for the month of April, I think it's very important to have an honest conversation about taxation in America. The United States Constitution clearly states in Article 1, Section 8, that the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Unlike in Great Britain, the framers bestowed this power to a Congress, directly representative of the people. Men, religious men like Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, were taught the ideals that all men and women are created equal and that there is no divine right of a king's rule. Moreover, our framers believed in the social contract, an intellectual device used to explain the appropriate relationship between individuals and their government. The social contract our framers envisioned was one in which legitimate government was defined by government, operated, and derived from the consent of the governed. In other words, the government envisioned by our framers will be answerable to those that elected them through regular elections. One of the most famous social contract thinkers, John Locke, believed if a government were to abuse that relationship, the governed had the natural right to overthrow their leaders. Our framers lived under the rule of King George III, a man of a small mind, according to one British historian, at a time when republicanism, defined as the protection of liberty through the rule of law, was sweeping across the British Empire. The British Empire, extending to the Americas, ruled by King George, was one where high taxes, without representation, was the rule of law, and where dissension was met with a noose. Following on the heels of the Molasses Act, where a tax was imposed on all molasses sold within the colonies, set to expire in 1763, the British Parliament passed the Sugar Act in April of 1764. The following year, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, stating that all printed materials within the colonies needed to be on taxed and stamped paper from London. In response to the Stamp Act, the American colonials formed the Stamp Act Congress, held in New York. In 1765, this assembly was seen as the first true collective dissension shown towards the British Crown in colonial history. What followed throughout the rest of the country, well, Mr. Speaker, that is a lesson in the early beginnings of American exceptionalism. Learning from their lesson of taxation without representation, a viewing gallery was built in our first House of Representatives so that any citizen may bear witness to the decisions made on their behalf. Following the American Revolution, very few taxes were enacted and imposed on the American people, such as modest taxes on alcohol, sugar, and tobacco to pay for the simple workings and infrastructure of government. The War of 1812 brought on new taxes on luxury goods, such as gold and jewelry. And after on-again, off-again taxes for the next half-century, Congress passed the Revenue Act of 1862 under the tutelage of President Abraham Lincoln. In 1913, the 16th Amendment replaced a large excise tax from alcohol that was repealed after Prohibition and provided the government with revenue to fund the First World War, thus making a federal income tax permanent. But after the war was over and Prohibition was repealed, was this tax still necessary? Did the creation of a permanent income tax contradict the previous taxes we saw in our early history? At the time, a very controversial amendment The 16th Amendment has been cited in multiple Supreme Court cases, most significantly Brush-Haber versus Union Pacific Railroad and Stanton versus Baltic Mining Company. The court ruled it was never the intent of Congress to place a direct tax upon the American people. Mr. Speaker, that's a decision we now see being debated again in the Supreme Court with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. These direct taxes, such as a direct tax on property ownership, were seen to be a portion for the states to decide. And since its induction, we have seen a mass exploitation of the income tax. No longer is the tax code used simply to pay for the workings of government. Today, we see tax dollars wasted on such egregious projects as $150,000 to the Institute of the Museum and Library Services funds for an American Museum of Magic in Marshall, Michigan, $175,000 in National Institute of Health funds for the University of Kentucky to study how cocaine enhances the sex drive of Japanese quail, and a National Science Foundation grant of $198,000 to the University of California, Riverside for research on whether using social media makes one happy. But, Mr. Speaker, why are we here today? We are here because millions of Americans have just filed their federal taxes. And I wonder how many of those Americans actually understand their taxes. How many of those Americans have to pay someone hundreds of dollars who can understand the seemingly unending web and thousands of pages of tax code? As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the American people know that even some of our colleagues here on Capitol Hill in this very body have had some issues with the tax code, to include our own Secretary of the Treasury. Most alarming might be the fact that the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Mr. Schulman, has claimed that he uses a tax preparer. Mr. Speaker, this is simply ridiculous. There are serious ramifications of a tax code that is over 67,000 pages. How many small and large business owners are not hiring because they are constantly being told they're not paying their fair share of taxes and cannot predict how much they will pay in the future? Mr. Speaker, I reject this progressive mantra that we need to raise taxes so that the government can waste more hard-earned American taxpayer dollars. So now is an absolutely important time that we go back and examine our tax code, move away from the progressive tax code system, and simplify it for the American people. Milton Friedman famously quipped, "If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there would be a shortage of sand." President Obama has increasingly upped his rhetoric of class envy by suggesting that higher income taxpayers are avoiding their responsibility and not paying their fair share. Instead of resorting to manipulative rhetoric, pitting one working American against another, the President and Congress should work together to enact pro-growth economic policies to help put Americans back to work. One of the biggest reasons our economy continues to struggle is because employers, both large and small, are filled with uncertainty. They look to Washington and see more government spending, the desire for more taxes, and more government regulations on the horizon. Washington's spending has been out of control for years, Mr. Speaker, and Republicans and Democrats certainly could have done more in the past to stop it. But the spending binge that has occurred under President Obama is truly unprecedented. President Obama's proposed tax hikes, buried in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, increasing regulation, government intervention into the private sector, and skyrocketing debt have created economic uncertainty, freezing investment and hiring. The solution for reviving our economy is straightforward. Cut wasteful government spending and remove the unnecessary tax and regulatory barriers that cause the uncertainty that prevents employers from hiring Americans. Understand that you cannot help the job seeker by punishing the job creator with higher taxes. Job creators know that historic debt levels will lead to historic job-destroying tax increases. If we raise taxes on the very people that we need to grow and invest in our economy, and hire new workers, our economy will continue to spiral. If we do not have economic growth, we will never balance the budget. Nearly 75% of America's small businesses, the economic engine of growth, pay their taxes through their owners' personal individual income. Half of those small businesses would suffer from a higher tax burden under the President's proposed tax increases. Those proposed tax increases will limit their ability to hire more workers and invest. Raising taxes on small businesses where a majority of Americans go to work every day will not put American families back to work. Instead, these tax increases will hamper these job creators' ability to keep workers on their payroll, expand their business, hire new employers, and invest. These tax increases will hurt economic recovery and growth because they suppress incentives to save and invest at a time when investments in capital are desperately needed to recover our economy. Mr. Speaker, since moving into the White House just over 3 years ago, President Obama has been spending millions of dollars campaigning around this great nation, pushing a so-called Buffett rule. The President claimed that the Buffett rule would stabilize our debt and deficits for the next decade. Mr. Speaker, I would like to know why the President continues to mislead the American people. The Bipartisan Joint Committee on Taxation stated that the Buffett rule would only raise $46.7 billion over the next 10 years, reducing our deficit by less than 0.4%. In other words, the so-called Buffett rule would only raise enough revenue to keep the federal government lights on for 11 days. Just a couple of weeks ago, the President was in the congressional district that I represent, touting his political divide and rule gimmick that would collect almost $47 billion through the year 2022. But when you look at comparison of the $7 trillion in federal budget deficits that will come in that exact same period, we are not making progress. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, we have a spending problem in Washington, D.C., and not a revenue problem. Mr. Speaker, the President should stop trying to score these cheap political points and work towards solutions that will actually solve our nation's debt crisis. His claim that the Buffett rule is something that will get us moving in the right direction toward fairness would be more convincing if he took other steps in that direction too. 3 years into his presidency, President Obama has not introduced a plan for comprehensive tax reform, arguably the most important vehicle for fixing the nation's finances and boosting long-term economic growth. When you look at the progressive tax code system that we have in the United States of America, we hear a lot of talk today about fairness and fair share and economic equality and shared sacrifice. But one of the things that we must understand, Mr. Speaker, is that the top 1% of wage earners in the United States of America are paying close to 40% of federal income taxes. The top 5% of wage earners in the United States of America pay close to 58% of federal income taxes. And the top 25% of wage earners in the United States of America pay 86% of federal income taxes. Mr. Speaker, to make matters worse, a large percentage of wage-earning households, about 47%, are paying absolutely nothing in federal income taxes. I would also like to speak to the other side of that equation, and that is how we are using the tax code as a weapon for behavior modification. One of the things we have to be very concerned about is all of the new taxes that will kick in with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act from January of 2013 out to January of 2018. One of those taxes even includes a real estate tax as well as an insidious tanning tax. At a time when the housing market is still in free fall, why would the President tax people for purchasing or selling their homes? It is not only unfair, but immoral to leave these types of policies as our legacy to our children and grandchildren. Also within this new government takeover of health care is the federalization of student loans. And we just voted about keeping those loan rates for our college students at 3.4%, not realizing that the federal government has now taken over the management of college loans. This completely cuts out any competition to help lower student loan interest rates. The federalization of these loans has done nothing but drive up interest rates on our young people. And President Obama himself even said that this will do nothing to help solve the problem of ever-increasing college tuition costs. This equates to a tax on the American dream of higher education, which is so crucial to success. Unfortunately, the economy and job market that the Obama administration is fostering is just pouring salt on an open wound, Mr. Speaker. Not only will recent graduates see themselves paying higher interest rates on their loans, they will also enter a job market that is seeing some of the highest unemployment rate for recent graduates in our history. Nearly half of all recent college graduates cannot find jobs after graduation. And Mr. Speaker, at the rate we are going, our children will be the first generation to not live a better life than their parents. This is simply unacceptable. But what is the President's response to this crisis? Introduce his fiscal year 2013 budget that would spend an incredibly obscene $47 trillion over the next 10 years. Higher taxes on individuals to pay for increased government spending. Higher taxes on small businesses, stifling new jobs. Higher taxes on investors to ensure our innovation lags behind the rest of the world. The President's planned tax increases seem designed to demonize the so-called rich and use them as a propaganda tool to score political points. But the fact is, next year, unless changes are made to the tax code, Americans will be subject to the largest tax increase in our nation's history. If the Obama-Bush tax cuts expire, a typical family of four in South Florida with a household income of $50,000 per year would have to pay $2,900 more in taxes each year. Seniors, Mr. Speaker, who count on dividends and investments to cover expenses during retirement will have to pay higher tax rates, even if they have a modest income. Children of farmers and small business owners who wish to continue the legacy of their parents will find it increasingly difficult to do so, as the death tax exemption will shrink from $5 million to $1 million. Further, inherited assets exceeding that amount will be taxed at a maximum rate of 55%, with a 5% surcharge on estates over $10 million. Investors will be battered with the capital gains tax increase from 15% to a top-level maximum of 25.8%. Seniors who rely on those dividend returns will also be hammered. Stock dividends currently at 15% will be taxed as ordinary income at a top rate of 43.4%. The President, Mr. Speaker, is also going after our military families. If he were to have his way, all military families would see their TRICARE health care fees triple above the current rates that they are already paying, all while leaving civilian unionized health care completely untouched. So, Mr. Speaker, why? Why is the President targeting some of the most vulnerable groups in our society, like our young people, seniors, and those who have risked their lives to protect our freedoms? This certainly isn't right. This certainly is not fair. It is, Mr. Speaker, downright immoral. In the last few months, we've heard a lot about this fairness from the President, especially when it comes to the so-called rich. In President Obama's own message about his proposed budget for fiscal year 2013, he says everyone must shoulder their fair share. But how does the President define fair when 47% of wage-earning households pay zero federal income taxes, while the top 25% pay 86%? Does President Obama think it's fair that our children and grandchildren will be burdened with debt because of his unprecedented reckless spending, because Washington currently borrows 42 cents of every dollar it spends? Does the President think it's fair to pile another $40,000 of debt onto every household in the United States of America over the last 3 years? Is it fair for every American to have a $50,000 debt obligation on them right now? Does the President think it's fair to use college students as props for these campaign-style rallies without explaining how his bad policies will leave them in deeper debt? Does the President think it's fair to force hard-working American taxpayers to subsidize a wealthy person's purchase of a hybrid luxury car just because it fits his idea of American energy? Does the President think it's fair to hand out millions of tax dollars to politically corrected solar energy companies that then go bankrupt? And we've seen 5 so far. Does the President think it's fair to tell thousands of workers they won't have jobs because he blocked the Keystone XL pipeline to solidify the support of the far-left radical environmentalists? And how does the President feel about the fact that 3 years of his policies have left us with more people on food stamps, more people in poverty, lower home values, higher gas prices, and higher unemployment? Is this fair, Mr. Speaker? And that's why we must simplify this tax code. Mr. Speaker, this great constitutional republic simply needs a flat tax. A flat tax would dramatically reduce the ill effects of our progressive tax code. Perhaps more important, it would reduce the federal government's power over the lives of taxpayers and get the government out of business of trying to micromanage the economy. The major features of a flat tax include a single flat rate. All flat tax proposals have a single rate that is usually less than 20%. The low flat rate solves the problem of high marginal tax rates by reducing penalties against productive behaviors such as work, risk-taking, and entrepreneurship. Elimination of special preferences. Flat tax proposals would eliminate provisions of the tax code to give preferential treatment on certain behaviors and activities. Getting rid of deductions, credits, and exemptions also helps to solve the problem of complexity, allowing taxpayers to file their tax returns on a simple form. There should be no double taxation of saving and investment. Flat tax proposals would eliminate the tax code's bias against capital formation by ending the double taxation of income that is saved and invested. This means no death tax, low or perhaps no capital gains tax, no double taxation of saving, and no double taxation on dividends. By taxing income only one time, a flat tax is easier to enforce and more conducive to job creation and capital formation. Now, there are 2 principal arguments for a flat tax: growth and fairness. Many economists are attracted to the idea because the current tax system, with its high rates and discriminatory taxation of saving and investment, reduces growth, destroys jobs, and lowers incomes. A flat tax would not eliminate the damaging impact of taxes altogether, but by dramatically lowering rates and ending the tax code bias against saving and investment, it would boost the economy's performance, especially when compared to the current tax code. Under a flat tax system, I believe in only 3 taxable deductions: a child tax credit, a mortgage interest tax deduction, and a charitable contribution deduction. Mr. Speaker, we want families to have children, and we want children to have homes, but most importantly, we want Americans helping Americans. This system would end the class warfare rhetoric perpetrated by President Obama and eliminates many, if not all, special interest loopholes that have been created over decades of tax code manipulation. Look at other countries around the world that have implemented and are in the process of implementing the flat tax. Economic growth increases, unemployment drops, and we see more compliance with the tax law. Nations such as Estonia and Slovakia are widely viewed as role models since both have engaged in dramatic reform and are reaping enormous economic benefits. Since instituting the flat tax, Estonia has thrived and become a member of the European Union. The flat tax was implemented in 1994 at 26% and has since fallen to 21% of income. From 2001 to 2007, Estonia's economy grew by an average of 9% per year. which, as we just saw with our recent GDP growth statistics for the first quarter of 2.2%, we are severely lacking. In 2003, its unemployment rate was in excess of 12%. Just 5 years later, only 4.5% of its population was without jobs. Compare that, Mr. Speaker, to the anemic GDP growth of the economic recovery under President Obama. I think the most important thing we have to come to understand is that this time in history truly does belong to the American people. The money, the resources belong to the American people. The liberal progressive approach that one should give more money to the government in order to better society is a flawed approach. And please, Mr. Speaker, tell me where a social, egalitarian, welfare nanny state has ever been successful in the world. Thomas Sowell once said, liberals seem to assume that if you don't believe in their particular political solutions, then you don't really care about the people that they claim to want to help. I do not believe that I can spend the money of over 500,000 people I represent in South Florida any better than they can themselves. We should be coming up with ideas of how to keep more money in the American pockets to invest in our economy instead of propagandist, divisive rhetoric separating the American people for the spoils of politicians. Let's start treating the American people as adults and find our own integrity and character, Mr. Speaker. The key thing that has to accompany this is that we must reduce the size and scope of government. As well, because as we start to focus more on Main Street, as we start to focus more on the hardworking American taxpayers and what is truly best for them, then we can have that investment at their level. We can have the growth at their level. When President Obama talks about increasing investments in government, I must simply inquire, what is the rate of return? We grew the bureaucracy of education, and the standards of education in the United States of America dropped. We created the Department of Energy, and still we are not energy independent. We bail out private sector industries, yet experience the slowest economic recovery in U.S. history. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that I came to the United States Congress is to begin enacting sweeping reforms that show the American people that we are serious about turning this economy around and that we're serious about creating the right type of policies that set the conditions for job creation. We're talking about economic freedom for the American people as opposed to economic dependency upon government. This incredible, exorbitant system that we have is complex to the point where it is causing more pain for the American people and causing them to not have the freedom that they deserve nor faith in any of us. Mr. Speaker, I reject the notion that fairness comes from wealth redistribution. True fairness rewards merit, creating the conditions for economic success and achieving your goals. That is the American way. To promote individual industrialism, to honor the entrepreneurial will and spirit of our countrymen. Mr. Speaker, simple question. Why did your ancestors come to this country? Did they come to get a fairer system of forced income redistribution? The government cannot and never will save our country, nor our economy. Unless we let our children earn their successes, we will hand them a country in decline, one where they will need to rely upon government for their success. It is immoral to pull the ladder of success out from under our children's feet like this. And how can I explain this to my children, my two daughters, Aubrey and Austin? How will you explain this to your children, Mr. Speaker? We have never done less with more in our history. And I believe here in Washington, D.C., we need to try doing a lot more with less of the resources of the American people. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, let us show the American people that we stand steadfast and loyal to this constitutional republic and to the preservation of a legacy of liberty, freedom, and democracy for subsequent generations. And to all others who would stand contrary to those simple beliefs? Well, Mr. Speaker, in the words of the great philosopher Mr. T, I say that I pity the fool. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today. I thought not to speak personally, but as I listened to the gentleman from Florida, as I've listened to members as they've taken the floor today, I thought I'd like to share a story with the American people, Mr. Speaker, and it's my own story. I went to college at Wake Forest University. I remember the day I was accepted. I was so excited. My parents were excited too, but we knew as a family with 6 children, my father having served in the United States Air Force for 30 years, that they wanted for me what they wanted for all of us, and that was the chance for the American dream in a different way than they had. And we knew that in order to do that, that it would take a combination of academic scholarships and grants and loans and savings to put together what it would take to receive a college education. And so that's what we did as a family. And so I stand here today to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that it gives me great sadness to know that Republicans on the other side of the aisle would have student loan interest rates increase double by July 1st without acting in this Congress. And today, very sadly, what we did was we said to families, and particularly to women, girls who want to go to school, that we'll double you have a choice. We'll either double your interest rates to 6.8% beginning in the first year of your college loan, or you can have preventive health care services. Imagine for the young women across this country that their choice is preventive health care services or the ability to go to school on a student loan, have that loan, the interest rate low, and then pay back that loan over a period of time. What a horrible choice. Now, we've listened earlier as people talk about building the American dream and climbing the ladders of opportunity to success, but that ladder has rungs. And one of the rungs of that ladder, as my family well knew when I became a freshman in college, is the opportunity to get a college education, to do better than the previous generation. It's what we want for all of our children. And so I went to school on student loans, and I went to school on student loans at a time when between undergraduate school and then law school, I effectively had almost $100,000 in student loans. A quarter of that, about $25,000 of that, was paid out to some bank that made a profit. And instead, what we've done as Democrats is we, in 2010, passed a package of reforms to student loans, lowered the interest rate of student loans so that it was affordable, made those loan payments affordable and manageable, made sure that when you were coming out of school, if you had a job that didn't pay you as much as you needed or wanted, that your student loans would be able to be managed, and then at an interest rate that was affordable. That's not what I had, but it's what we were able to give our young people today, and it's what Republicans in this Congress have decided to take away. And so then in 2007, we passed the College Cost Reduction and Access Act. It provided relief to students from high interest rates by lowering those interest rates. When I came out of undergraduate school and law school, I had this array of student loans that had different interest rates, and little did I know that when I tried to consolidate those loans, I actually ended up paying the higher interest rate. Today, when students are graduating from college under what Democrats did in 2007, that we actually, and this Congress, we made sure that the interest rates would be affordable, that students would then be able to manage them, and that they'd be able to pay their loans back. And so I want to tell you something that I'm not really proud of, and it's that I also got in trouble paying my loans back. Didn't make as much as I needed to pay those and to balance my other responsibilities. And it was difficult, but over a period of time, because the program in fact was affordable, because I knew that we all had, my neighbors and we all had my back, that I could pay those student loans back over a period of time. And you know, Mr. Speaker, just 1 month before I was elected to Congress, I paid my last student loan. I can still remember that day in January, writing that check to pay the last of my student loans. And you know how proud I am to have been able to do that? And the reason is because then I knew that when my son was going to college and we were doing the same things that my parents did when I went to college, collecting the savings and academic scholarships, but also putting together a package of loans that would be affordable for him to go to school. It's what we do. It's sort of that contract that we have from one generation to the next generation. I borrowed for my student loans. I paid those student loans off. My son borrowed some for his student loans and is now in the process of paying those off. But let's look at what Republicans would have us do. First of all, we know that if we don't act by July 1st, that interest rates will in fact double from 3.4% to 6.8% for 7 million students across this country. And already students across our country bear nearly $1 trillion in student loan debt. And they struggle in this difficult economy, as many are struggling, to repay those loans. But think what would happen if those loans were allowed, if the interest rate on those loans were allowed to, it was allowed to increase to 6.8%, to effectively double that interest rate. Well, what does that mean for your average student? Well, Mr. Speaker, what it means is that a student, on average, coming out with $23,000 in debt would have to pay roughly an additional $11,000 over the course of that loan period to make up for that additional interest. This makes no sense whatsoever. And I think that students across the country must be wondering what it is that Republicans are doing here in Congress that would have them double their interest rate, especially when we're talking about a part of our population that's done everything that we've asked of them. They succeeded in high school. They're going on to college. They are coming out with the promise of a hope for a good job and to be able to do better than the previous generation. And we're saying to them, Republicans in this House are saying to them instead, we want you to double your interest rate. We want you to pay not just the $23,000 that you owe, but an additional $11,000 in interest. And more than that, what we've heard from some, even on this House floor, is that there are many on the other side of the aisle who don't believe that we should have a federally subsidized student loan program at all. Education for those who are wealthy and who can afford it, but for middle-class families, not the ability to pay for to get a student loan and to pay that loan back in a manageable way over a period of time. And so we stand united as Democrats and say we are not going to sacrifice middle-class families and stack them up against women's health care. We want to make sure that we pay for this lowered student loan interest by ending a corporate tax break. That seems fair enough, and yet Republicans on the other side of the aisle will simply not be reasonable and agree with what the overwhelming majority of the American people agree to, and that is that we should have student loans that are available and accessible to middle-class families. And so I'll have more to say on this, Mr. Speaker, but at this time I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Oregon, new to the Congress, who will join me in this discussion about student loans and student loan interest. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you to my colleague for yielding. I'm so happy to be here today with my colleagues in support of preventing a drastic hike on student loan interest rates. Education truly is the key to improving our economy and ensuring a strong America for generations to come. But current barriers to higher education jeopardize those goals for too many. Education needs to be accessible to everyone, not just to those who can pay tuition out of their pocket. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the Stop the Rate Hike Act, which will prevent a jump in student loan interest rates, but not at the expense of health care for vulnerable populations and women. Federal student loans play a significant role in improving access to education. If we allow interest rates to double on July 1st, this key component of college affordability will become an increased burden on millions of students across the country who currently have student loans. The average amount of loan debt for these students is more than $23,000, and if we don't prevent this hike in interest rates, they will see their debt burden increase by an average of $1,000 just this year. Now, I'm pleased that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle recognize the importance of preserving affordable interest rates for students. But I'm disappointed in proposals that would guarantee these rates at the expense of other struggling populations. The Prevention and Public Health Fund is a critical tool that decreases costs and improves access to health care for a number of populations, including women and children. If fully funded in 2013, women and children will have access to many life-saving screenings and preventive care, like funding for breast and cervical cancer screenings and childhood vaccinations. Without this important fund, many women and children would not be able to access these tests, leading to poorer outcomes and increased costs on our health care system in the future. Now, I'm hopeful that the Senate will act to prevent a jump in loan interest rates and send a bill back to the House that does not cut preventative health care funding. I look forward to working with my colleagues to improve our education system, create jobs, and continue our economic recovery without reversing the important steps forward we've made to improve access to health care. With that, I yield back to my good colleague.
I thank the gentlelady from Oregon, and I was just reminded, as I listened to her, that in her state of Oregon, something on the order of 119,000 students will see an increase of about $93 million in interest rates if this takes place on July 1st. In my own state, home state of Maryland, 103,400 students would see an increase in interest rates if the rate is allowed to go up from 3.4% now to double at 6.8%. And in Maryland, that would be to the tune of $80 million. These are extraordinary numbers, and that burden would be borne by those to whom we've said, you've done the right thing, you've gone to college, you've paid for your college, and now you're going to be able to repay your loans, but we want you to pay an additional in student loan interest because the Republicans refuse to act without also taking away preventive health care. These are really extraordinary numbers, Mr. Speaker, and I think when the American people hear about the danger that is afoot come July 1st with the increase in student loan interest, middle-class families all across this country will be completely outraged. And with that, I'd like to yield a few minutes of time to my colleague from New York, Ms. Clark.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Today, the House passed H.R. 4628, the Interest Rate Reduction Act, or as I like to refer to it, the Take from the Poor, Give to the Poor, Not in Our Interest Act. This Republican-led bill will prevent the student loan interest rate from doubling to 6.8%, but in doing so would effectively gut the Prevention and Public Health Trust Fund, a key component of the Preventative Care Act. When my Republican colleagues finally acknowledged the need to prevent student loan interest rates from rising on July 1st, I had a glimmer of hope that somewhere in their hearts remained some small bit of compassion for their fellow Americans. But as I was quickly slapped back into reality when I saw that the Republicans intended to pay for this bill, as they usually do, on the backs of middle-class families and the poor. The Prevention and Public Health Trust Fund was created to ensure adequate funding for preventative health initiatives. These initiatives help to improve the health of poor and middle-class families, and by improving health, also help to lower health care costs. Initiatives supported by this fund are successful because they are community-based and as such are uniquely tailored to the needs of targeted communities. Already there are several key initiatives supported by the fund that benefit Americans. Two of the initiatives which directly benefit the 11th Congressional District of New York are the Chronic Disease Prevention Act, which enables communities to use evidence-based interventions to reduce chronic conditions and prevent heart attacks, diabetes, strokes, and other conditions, and the HIV/AIDS Prevention Act, which focuses on HIV prevention in high-risk populations and communities by increasing HIV testing opportunities, linking HIV-positive persons with needed services, and filling critical gaps in data collection. To eliminate funding for programs that improve the health and lives of millions of Americans and lower health care costs is not prudent, which is why this ill-conceived bill is the wrong way to address this crisis. Luckily, there are two ways that this crisis can be averted. Specifically, I ask that Speaker Boehner bring to the floor either H.R. 3826, a bill introduced by my friend and colleague, Representative Joe Courtney, or H.R. 4816, a bill introduced by another of my Democratic colleagues, John Tierney. While both bills will prevent an increase in the student loan interest rate, H.R. 4816 would also pay for this by decreasing the amount of subsidies given to big oil companies. So as opposed to paying for these interest rate frees on the backs of the middle class and the poor, the Democratic-sponsored H.R. 4816 would require that big oil companies pay their fair share. So in closing, I'm issuing a call to action to all students, postgraduates, and their families. Pick up the phone, email, tweet, and send a Facebook message to Speaker Boehner and demand that he immediately either bring H.R. 3826 or H.R. 4816 to the floor for a vote. So my colleagues, we have a challenge ahead of us. Do we take from the poor to give to the poor, or do we do what is right by the American people? And that is to make sure that our students' interest rates do not increase and that we meet the demands for health care in our civil society. With that, I yield back to the gentlelady, and thank you for the time.
I thank the gentlelady from New York, and I just wanted to point out to her, as she well knows from New York, that 422,000 students will see an increase if this is allowed to happen on July 1st. Would see an increase of interest rates from 3.4% to 6.8%. And for those 422,000 students in New York, that would mean $340 million in increased interest rates. And so I think we can see all across the country, and just really, Mr. Speaker, would like to urge our students out there and our families to think about what this would mean for them. 7 million students across this country doing exactly what we asked them to and facing a doubling of interest rates on July 1st. And I notice that we've been joined today by my colleague from Ohio, who's going to help us understand also what's happening in the state of Ohio, the home of Ohio State, where I know a lot of students must be paying attention to the fact that their interest rates will double on July 1st. Mr. Ryan.
I thank the gentlelady, who's also a graduate of the University of New Hampshire Law School, two proud graduates, and would just like to chime in and talk a little bit because Ohio is a state that since the inception of the state into the Union, we have always in Ohio made investments into our schools, our colleges, our universities, through the land grant system and whatnot, because there was always this deep appreciation for education, knowing as we moved, as this country moved throughout the industrial age into the information age now, how essential it is for our kids to be able to go to school and to be able to go to community college and to be able to go to college and to be able to take a loan out, which many, many years ago they really didn't even have to do because the Pell Grant was at a level that they didn't really necessarily need a loan. You could get a part-time job or a summer job or work for the wherever back in your community throughout the year over the holidays and be able to supplement, and your parents could help out a little bit, and you would be able to get an education. And today, because of the explosion in education costs, many of us believe that there is a responsibility for all of us collectively as a society to do something that we can't do on our own, and that's make investments in education and allow every citizen in this country, if they want to go to college. But knowing that not everyone wants to go to college. Maybe they want to go to community college, which is fine. But it's about ramping up the education level in the United States of America, and it's about making sure that it's affordable. And this is kind of a decisive issue here in Congress today. It came to a head right here on the House floor where there was one side of the aisle that said, we want to make these investments and make sure that the student loan rates don't double to 6.8% from 3.4%, because that'll be a burden on middle-class families, and that'll be a further burden on parents who are co-signing or paying these student loans, or more of a burden for the student who wants to graduate from college and then maybe go out and have a decent start in life without a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 a year debt hanging over their head. That would do a lot to stimulate the economy. And we have the other side who said, well, we don't want to do that, but the political pressure got so hot that we're going to do that, and we're going to take it out of screenings for poor and middle-class women to get cancer screenings. Now, what I really dislike about what's happened in this country in the last few years, it's come down to either screw the little guy or screw the little guy. We can't do one or the other. We can't ask for the Buffett rule. We can't ask for a little bit more money from Warren Buffett so that we can invest into these kinds of things. We certainly can't ask the oil and gas industry to pay a little bit more and close a loophole so that we can afford to pay for education for all of our citizens. We can't restructure the tax code and make investments that are going to yield a huge benefit for early childhood, for example. So what are we doing? This doesn't make any sense, because America hasn't become successful because we failed to invest. We became successful because America always invested. We always put money into education. We always put money into research and development. We always made sure that our education level was to the level of the technology of its time. And that's what we're talking about here. And in Ohio, we need these investments because the middle class in Ohio has been squeezed, consistently squeezed for 30 years. Wages have been stagnant. And so now if you're sitting in Ohio and you're a member of the building and construction trades, or you're, plumbers and pipe fitters, or cement masons, or electrical workers, now in Ohio, they're trying to pass a right to work for less legislation too, which means that the average worker in a state that has right to work for less laws makes about $1,500 a year less than a state that doesn't have it. Their health insurance is 2.6 percentage points lower in right-to-work states. Your pensions are lower. So imagine you're this person who's trying to make ends meet in Ohio, and your wages have been stagnant for 30 years, and now they're going to say the Republican Party is pushing, we'll do right to work. So you'll see lower wages, lower health care benefits, and worse pension. And then the Republicans in Congress, in the House, are passing a bill saying, oh, by the way, you're only going to make $1,500 a year less, but if you have a student loan that you've signed on to for your son or daughter, you're going to have to pay double that interest rate. Or if you get a student loan, you're going to have to pay double the interest rate that it is now. And that if you have health care and maybe your kid was going to stay on it because he's under 26 or she's under 26 years old, Republicans want to repeal that. So now your kid's got to go out and get health care and pay more on a student loan while you're making $1,500 a year less, and your pension's going to be less, and your health care is going to be less. What are we doing? This is not the kind of America that we all believe in. And the student loan issue, I think, cuts right to the heart of it. And then you have this compounding assault on the American worker, whether it's right to work for less or whether it's destroy collective bargaining, as they tried to do in Ohio last year, and now it's the student loans, and now we can't even ask Warren Buffett to help out. And I think it's time for us to all wake up as Americans and say, wait a minute, where's the balance? Where's the fairness? Where's the investments into our future? And, you know, many of us are either sons and daughters or grandsons or granddaughters or great-grandsons and great-granddaughters of immigrants. And the value placed upon education in those families is because that was the way out. That was the way up. That was the way to have success in America. And what scares me about this is that this is not the kind of America many of us believe in. This is not the kind of America many of us want. And this is the kind of America that is very, very short-sighted and where we're going to end up. And let me just say, lastly, and I'll yield back to the gentlelady, do we really think, with 300 to 400 million people in America, do we really think that we're going to be competitive with 1.3 or 1.4 billion people in China, 1.2, 3 or 4 or 5 billion people in India, if we're not making the adequate investments into education? And so these folks at home who got it will have to deal with right to work, student loans, less pension, less health care, less this, less that. At the same time, the tax burden is going to be pushed onto them. They'll be forced to vote on a local property tax for police and fire. They'll be forced to vote on a local property tax for their local school levies, mental health, the whole 9 yards. And it's getting continued squeeze for the middle class. And this student loan issue and what's happening with the rates here and the cuts that are being made here are a major part of that. And I yield back to the gentlelady.
I'd like to thank the gentleman, and I'm reminded as he's speaking that there are middle-class families in Ohio and all across this country for whom this isn't just about feeling good about making sure that young people can go to college. It's about making certain that our middle-class families aren't just struggling, but they're really surviving in this economy and in the economy going forward. I was reminded again that in Ohio, 379,000 students would see an increase of about $294 million if this increase in student loans is allowed to go forward. And I think about those students at Ohio State University, at Oberlin College, at Xavier. I could name a lot of them. I remember as a second grader at living on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And there was not a moment in second grade that my parents didn't impress on me that one day I would go to college. My mom and dad didn't know how I would go to college, but they knew that I had to go. And at the time, I was such a fan of all those great Ohio universities. But I also know that were I to go then or to go now, then in addition to our savings and to academic scholarships and maybe even to Pell Grants, I would also need to take out student loans. And that's the situation that students in Ohio and across this country face in realizing that on July 1st, without action by this Congress, Republicans and Democrats who owe it to middle-class families to make sure that those student loans don't increase. Everything else is increasing. Let's not increase the interest rate on student loans, and I thank the gentleman.
You're welcome. And I think when you're looking at a state like Ohio, and like many states, like Maryland, like Pennsylvania, where you're retooling your economy,